Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those online, and thank you for joining this session, Global Shifts, Local Needs, Addressing Skills Shortfalls via Mobility. We will just wait for the room to settle a little bit. Great, thank you. So I'm really delighted to be with you again this year, discussing a topic very close to my heart on labour mobility, labour schemes and legal pathways. I'm joined today by Agostino Consolo, advisor at the European Central Bank, and by Antoons, a partner at Fragomen. The discussions on migration, as we've seen over the past few days, really often focus on management of irregular migration, overhaul of asylum systems, return and readmission, and very often in the discussions we neglect the flip side. So I was very pleased to see, even in the discussions on the new pact, in the discussions yesterday on return and readmission.
Ladies and gentlemen, please get seated. We are about to start our second session on labor migration.
We have already started, so I will continue. So very often this flip side is somehow neglected.
Okay.
There's someone with a...
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning to those online. And, there's a feedback of me speaking about the session. Okay. So there is a recording of the session that somehow started to overplay. So we will regroup. And so the flip side of labour migration, which is really essential on enabling the arrival and integration of skilled migrants, is very often neglected. And indeed, we can see in many EU member states that there is a difficult narrative around migration. All kinds of migrants, all kinds of migration are coupled into one package of discourse. And this makes it extremely difficult to open up legal pathways and to really attract and retain the skills that we need. I caveat the focus today on labour mobility by saying that it is just one part of a broader workforce strategy. EU member states, of course, need to look at improving the activation rates of their populations. They need to look at upskilling, at reskilling, as the Philippines also mentioned. But our demographic realities mean that labour mobility and labour migration need to be a part of the puzzle. So today we will look at how labour migration can enable economic development with evidence from the European Central Bank. And we will flag some of the challenges and opportunities that the key engines of our economic activity, the business community, face when looking to source migrant talent. The EURES shortage sector report from 2024 has flagged that healthcare, construction, hospitality are key sectors with shared shortages across the EU. This level of vocational skills is extremely difficult to secure. Due to skills recognition, the visa pathways are very often agile when it comes to those with high skills, and less so for those at a vocational level. Also in the food security area, rural livelihoods, the agriculture sector increasingly relies on migrant workers, yet also faces key challenges to recruit and mobilize. So before I turn over to the panelists, I'd like to show a video that demonstrates how in some countries, business associations and cooperatives are taking action to address their labour shortages in a way that also develops a business ecosystem with the country of origin. Network U, between Italy and Egypt, is supported with the EU-funded Migration Partnership Facility, proving that business-led approaches, investment in training, and an enabling governance architecture can really deliver concrete benefits. So if we can please show the video, and then we will come back to the panel.
E per un altro settore cruciale, quello del lavoro. Un comparto, a partire dal settore agricolo, in cui il dialogo e lo scambio possono rappresentare importanti opportunità, come emerso nel corso di una iniziativa organizzata nell'ambito della 88esima edizione della Fiera del Levante. Al centro dell'incontro il progetto Network U, organizzato da Conf Cooperative Puglia e Siam Bari. Obiettivo: sviluppare un modello sostenibile di mobilità qualificata tra Italia ed Egitto, attraverso programmi di formazione e tirocini. Il progetto, della durata di 36 mesi, si rivolge a 60 giovani operai tecnici del settore agricolo provenienti dalle aree più fragili dell'Egitto e 40 neolaureati delle facoltà di agricoltura, biologia e ingegneria.
Da un recentissimo rapporto sui fabbisogni e occupazione delle imprese pugliesi si denota che ci sono migliaia di vacancy in alcuni settori, da quelli della manodopera, come dire, più semplice, no? Che riguarda il turismo e l'agricoltura, ma per arrivare alla transizione digitale, all'ICT, dove senza immigrazione, senza migrazioni circolari, senza tirocini extraeuropei, senza, direi, corridoi lavorativi, c'è il rischio del blocco produttivo delle imprese.
This project is showing how the connection between the confederations at the local level, the regional level and also the national level is important to boost the labor migration mobility between Egypt and Italy, and we believe that this project will be considered as an example of how we can all together step up the mobility between our two countries with the use and the support of the private sector.
Un progetto strategico per il settore agricolo che guarda al domani puntando su innovazione e collaborazione.
Rappresenta veramente quindi la possibilità di portare quindi un'innovazione lungo la filiera e questa filiera farla interagire anche con quella egiziana, e quindi il partenariato mira ad avere anche delle forti opportunità commerciali tra i due paesi.
Da un punto di vista agricolo è quello di poter avere anche quelle risorse umane di cui oggi abbiamo fortemente bisogno su tutto il territorio nazionale e in particolare su quello del Mezzogiorno. Da un punto di vista dell'agroalimentare sicuramente su scambi commerciali interessanti.
Great, thank you very much. Agostino, with some extra sound effects.
Okay.
I turn to you. The European Central Bank has released some key data on the contribution of migrant workers to Europe's economic growth. I have a few questions. Why did the bank decide to highlight this information? You have a blog. And can you please share some of the key findings and how you see the impact on the EU's economic context, please?
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. And thanks for inviting me to the 10th conference on migration. It's a great pleasure to be here, and just to be clear, I'm a macroeconomist working at ECB, so not necessarily very close to this migration forum. But indeed, as you mentioned, we have started working also on migration, and we have an ECB blog post jointly with some of my colleagues, Oscar Arce, Antonio Diaz da Silva, and Marco Weisler, where we look at the contribution of migration. And of course, what I will say today and what we say in the blog is our own opinion and not the ECB one, so the usual disclaimer. Let me say why we do so. We usually look at the euro area, and we look at the state of the economy, also to understand the inflationary pressure and potential inflation developments. And one key element for looking at the euro area economy is the labor market. It's one of the more frictional labor market if we compare to other markets like financial markets or housing market. And therefore, we recently noticed a sort of, let's say, misalignment between the economic activity, which was somehow slowing down or like remaining not as robust as in the post-pandemic recovery, and the developments in employment. And when we start digging into the data, and we saw that indeed labor force participation was increasing quite significantly. And when we look at it more also from a growth perspective, we saw that both in terms of economic growth, so GDP growth, real GDP growth, but also in terms of labor force, the population element was, and the people, the human resources were like the more important element compared to technology or productivity. So in our first block, what we look at, we see that GDP growth as a human component recently more than the technological component. And therefore this triggered us additional question of looking at what are the drivers of the labor force dynamic. And we soon discovered that a key driver of the labor force was indeed migration. Here by migration, I mean indeed labor migration. It's very much limited to the macro data that we use. These are standardized Eurostat data. And we see that I mean, labor force growth in the post-pandemic was basically almost 3 times as large as in the pre-pandemic period. And although the migration somehow cohorts group is relatively small compared to the native population, it contributes of the same amount. So that basically means that there was been a strong push for migration on the labor market dynamics. And this is something that it was quite relevant for us. So from an economic perspective, we want to understand also what are the key factors, whether labor supply factors, labor demand factors driving the upturn in the labor market, because this has different implications for inflation, economic activity. And among these elements, what we found also quite interesting is that there is an heterogeneous pattern across euro area countries. So on average, we find that in the euro area, there is a positive contribution from migration, and then it's not only of basically people employed, but also on participation and people arriving in the euro area. But this is quite heterogeneous across euro area countries, also because it depends on different level of participation rates across euro area countries. So countries that have already achieved a very high participation rates, they find more difficult to accommodate increase in labor force via domestic worker, and therefore they tap on the external worker, on migration channel to increase economic activity. While some other countries that maybe they start from lower participation rates, they find a the possibility to still tap the domestic labor force. So this is, I would say, in a nutshell, some of the key findings that we have found in our work, and which is also quite interesting to understand the dynamics for the rest of the euro area.
When I listened to the blog and read some of the research, you noted that the level of education of foreign workers has improved, and so has the alignment of the jobs to qualification for the employment of migrant workers. But there is still quite a need for improvement. We have a lot of what one would maybe term brain waste, where migrant workers are working at levels lower than their qualification should permit. What are the barriers that you noted that foreign workers encounter when entering the EU labour market?
Yeah, thanks. So indeed, for us it was very difficult to measure the match, the quality of the match in terms of level of skills or level of education with the jobs. But we did find that compared to previous trends, the migration unemployment rate has drifted down, which basically means that people entering the labor market in the euro area, they get match between job and worker is faster, and therefore the unemployment rate of migrants has drifted down. And this is also important because overall in the past was higher, and therefore new migrants were somehow increasing the unemployment rate, while more recently we find that the euro area unemployment rate and EU unemployment rate have benefit also from lower migration unemployment rate, better matches, faster matches. And we notice in the blog 2 elements. One, of course, the occupation mismatch. So we see that this has improved over time, but also what we also notice is that over time, not only the first wave of migration, but also the second generation of migration, that gets more and more upgraded in terms of skills, and therefore they get better matches. So the migration is more of a dynamic process, not only like as the first generation entrants, etc. So we found a good positive development in terms of skill dynamic and matching in the labor market, which is definitely favorable for productivity. But let me say also like a general comment on the issue about the skill composition. I think we come from I would say, so overall, I would say macro thinking, labor market thinking in the 80s and 90s, where technology was skill bias, and therefore there was, as a result, policy were very much focusing on the upper target of the skill distribution and matching with technology, and say, okay, we have high-level technology, we need high-skill people, etc. But over time, because of the introduction of automation, etc., we also have seen that in the labor market there's been a sort of polarization. And therefore, what I see nowadays prevailing is that in the skill spectrum, all the type of skill are complementary and needed in different scale, maybe, but the Euro area, for instance, needs like skills that, as also the video show, they go from talent professionals or technicians to ICT people, but also to a specialized worker in the agriculture or in the tourism sector. So understanding that nowadays, also because of aging and also other domestic dynamic in the labor market, we can not only rely on the high skill segment, but there is a need for so-called the production function of the economy, as we used to put in our model, that we need a set of skill complementarity that cannot be basically reduced to zero on some element. So that is very important. And among the barriers, I think one key element is that if we think about, I mean, the migration channel is like thinking about the labor market which goes beyond our border. And of course, the labor market in general is a very frictional labor market. It's a labor market where, so it's a market where information and knowledge about the skill types and our productivity is very limited. And therefore doing a so-called of a match is more difficult. So all the barriers and all the discussion have been taken today, for instance, on how to improve communication, how to make like migration standards easier, how to reduce barrier to entries in terms of language or pre-training course. These are all definitely welcome elements to reduce this barrier. And of course, in the Euro area, in the EU, the fact that migration remains with a strong focus on national competence, and therefore we have several states, several nations with different views and different needs and different regulation, does not basically help to make the migration standards easier. But of course there are different needs, and therefore either in terms of language or I would say sectoral composition, there are like limitations that probably will be very unsurmountable, very difficult to avoid, and therefore like more information is probably what a more direct channels. It's probably the best way to enhance labor migration.
Thank you. Indeed, I think we see EU member states are much more comfortable talking about the race for talent when it comes to high talent, high skills, when it comes to researchers, to those with PhDs. But the economic need is much more diverse, and the skills needed. The EU has taken steps to try and standardize when it comes to high skilled with the blue card, but there is not a similar pathway for those on the medium skilled or the vocational spectrum. So we do encounter far more diversity between EU member states and challenges indeed there. I mean, I have quoted your ECB statistics heavily over the past few months. It's very useful to be able to cite facts, independent facts that are not emotional when it comes to discussing migration. Will the bank continue to gather this data? I mean, I would say it's supportive of EU policy discussions. And are there plans to perhaps look at certain sectors or trends linked to labor migration and the economic sectors?
Yeah, we will continue to look at this phenomenon because it's basically has been big, relevant. You know, when you look at some charts, some decomposition, you realize that it's not something that you can ignore. So it's relevant, and we will look from several perspectives. So one element is, for instance, as you probably know, there are the so-called EU age working group. They provide population projection, and in those population projection, migration is expected to come down. And if we overlap basically the last 2 years, you see that compared to those projections, we see stronger migration. Therefore, we see that migration remains an important factor. So we want to look at whether the Euro area, the EU will converge to those projections or whether migration will remain relevant. So this from a projection perspective. We will also look at some sector decomposition and also to understand what sector needs migration and how the labor force is basically allocated. That is important to go back to the story of the complementarity. You can think that some sector needs more migrant, and the economy needs those sectors. So you cannot at a certain point say we have policy or we have or we only target high-skill migration, because certain sectors, certain firms need a combination of those migration. Otherwise, they cannot move forward in production. And so this is quite important to understand whether there are sort of non-linearities or key points in the production function, and therefore that's why we need to look at the sectoral distribution of migration. And then also another relevant factor is aging. In our decomposition, we see that in certain countries, the aging is basically negatively affecting domestic labor force, and migration is helping to alleviate these population dynamics. So the combination of migration and aging trends are very important going forward to understand the overall labor contribution for the euro area and the EU economy.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So literally turning to you, Jo, I think the data doesn't lie. So the economic case and the demographics are quite clear. But what is the actual experience of business? There is this reality. Has it generated political space? Has it generated pathways? Has it generated some agility? What are the key trends that you see that affect the ability of employers to recruit? What are the, let's say, the risks and challenges that employers experience when they're looking outside of the EU? And does this affect how employers plan in terms of the growth of their business or how they do business?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, good morning, everyone. And let me first thank you for having me today, and also congratulations on the 10th anniversary. Happy to be here again. So I've been invited as a lawyer specialized in economic migration. So I'm here to talk more about the enabling environment, about the legal pathways that are available to effectively address the skill shortages. Was happy to hear yesterday that labor migration indeed was mentioned several times in terms of promotion, not only to address, the labor shortages, but to remain competitive. And also to say labor migration, it's also needed because we want to be as well, the destination of choice. Europe, the destination of choice. So that's not only about legal pathways, making sure that talent find their way to Europe, but also making sure that they're willing to come to Europe. Europe is attractive, and that we have sufficient policies as well to ensure their integration, the integration of their family members, family reunification, access to the labor market, and indeed also long-term residency. I was also happy to hear that it's not about irregular migration and legal migration, that it goes hand in hand. And we have seen very nice examples that it's maybe not the only response, but it goes hand in hand. Now, when we talk about the enabling environment, maybe I think we said it last year, and I want to repeat it again. When you see the latest EURES report, it states again that 1/3 of the companies find it very difficult to find the right talent. And even in their labor market, but also outside the labor market, and bring in, the talent that they need. And if we look at the small and medium-sized companies, it's even 50%. 50% is unable to find the people that they actually need to have business continuity. Now, you already alluded to it. We always say yes. Okay, we have immigration systems, and if you look at Europe, yes, we have these. We have these. And you already said there have been very nice initiatives at European level to ensure that every single member state, at least on top of the systems that they have nationally, have the EU Blue Card scheme for the highly skilled workers, that they have systems to enable young, students, young graduates that for potential training or entering into the labor market. So there are, you know, for those highly skilled talent, there are pathways. And it's even so with the revision of the EU Blue Card that there has been also facilitation with respect to their integration, about the possibility of change of employer, the possibility, I would say, also ensuring that change of employer, that you can easily move to another EU member state, that you have smoother family reunification rules, that you can more easily have access to permanent residency by completion of period and accumulation of periods of residence in several EU member states. So there is a lot already that exists. But when we then look at the labor shortages and we look at not the highly skilled, then we see that it's much more complex and diverse, and that you don't necessarily have in every single member state those pathways available. And we see also that the change of the overhaul of immigration you know, systems to address those labor shortages and create pathways, that is not a priority. Unfortunately, you see, of course, that there are, you know, small-scale changes. For example, a lot of EU member states have now introduced what we call shortage occupation lists, so meaning that you have a list of shortage occupations for which there is no need for labor market testing in order for those individuals to be eligible to I would say, a work and residence permit, or that they have accelerated procedures, but you don't see this necessarily in all the member states. And you also see, unfortunately, that those lists are not always very dynamic and not necessarily respond to the actual needs of the employers, and that the data they are based upon are often public data, but not necessarily, you know, the actual data that you see on, you know, the vacancies that are available on LinkedIn, you know, how long have they been available. So there are, you know, initiatives. We heard yesterday Italy that have raised quota. We've seen the same in other EU member states. France, for example, that introduced a permit for medical professions. So you see initiatives, but it's not that one can say, bring in that talent and we make sure that they can be matched with the employers that they need them. On the other hand, while you see to some extent some liberalization, you see as well more restrictive policies when it comes, for example, to family reunification, more restrictive policies with respect to long-term residency, naturalization. We see a lot of language requirements that come into play. So there are, I would say, a landscape that is complex and diverse. Apart from the pathways, what I would like to raise as well is really the complexity. The complexity not only in one single member state, but if you across Europe, but also if you look into one single member state. The question that all of the employers ask to us, can you please create a system that just tell, I'm an individual, I have this nationality, I go from this country to this country, and I'm going to do A. What type of permit am I eligible to? How long does it take, and what documents? That information, you might have websites, if there exist in English, but you don't find that information. It's so difficult to find the right, to understand whether there is actual pathways for those individuals. I also like the initiative, for example, that the European Commission would like to start up with the gateway in India, you know, as an information kiosk for ICT professionals, that they at least understand what is available in terms of pathways in the European countries. Apart from the complexity, I need to reiterate it, it's the long processing times, you know, to get the relevant permits. And that can have to do with backlogs and high workload, staffing issues, but it's there. And I just give you an example without naming any country, but the country I come from, you know, at this point in time, the Foreigners Office takes 17 weeks to process the residence part of a single permit application. On top of that, you have the regional authorities between 1 to 4 weeks, and then you have the consular post, if you're lucky that you have an appointment, 2 weeks. So if you count that, and then the 4 weeks more or less for the document collection, and I'm not talking about labor market testing, I'm not talking about recognition of degrees, you're already at almost half a year just to process the permit. And then you don't even have your residence permit in country, because that can take another couple of months, during which you're not able to travel, during which you might not even be able to open a bank account, and during which your employer might not be able to pay you because you don't have a bank account. Just to give you a couple of examples, what is the hurdles of companies? Another point that I want to raise is the cost. I mean, we see, and I'm not talking about the US here, I'm talking about Europe, but the immigration fees have increased significantly and beyond, the inflation rates. If I just look at the UK, I mean, for example, the annual, health surcharge has increased with 66%, to almost £1,000 per person. The sponsorship license has increased with 100% and is now, 500 and a bit of pounds. And then if you then look at salary thresholds have increased, we see more and more member states that ask for, additional, proof, and it's fair, but proof, can you prove that you can support your family members, much stricter family reunification rules. So all those costs one also need to take into account. And then maybe as a last point, and that I want to raise is the environment of non-trust towards employers. I mean, the employers we work with, and I know we need to fight against fraud and whatever, but the employers we work with are trustful employers. However, they're not always treated like that. They are subject to scrutiny, subject to audits, enforcement. So creating a trustful environment, working with companies and enable them to do what they need to do would be, I would say already one big step forward. You asked me as well, what do companies do, And I don't say that, that the policies in itself make it or don't make it necessarily to bring in the talent. There are hurdles, there are barriers. For small and medium-sized companies, it can be a blocking stone. We have to be honest. For the multinationals, they find their way around. They can pay, Fragomen to support them. They have, they can create more easily pipelines with universities, to make sure that the foreign students, the graduates find their way. We see also that they have, unfortunately, also revisited their global mobility policies, and where in the past, you had all types of policies for graduates, for developments, for specialists, that you now have those policies really focused because of cost to really the critical roles, the high value roles, the specialized roles. We see also in our practice a big rise in short-term assignments and intra-corporate transfers. Again, for big, multinationals, instead of local hiring, and that's not what governments want. Instead of local hiring, we go and we work through our affiliates in other locations to recruit their people, have them employed, and then deploy them around. And then maybe one last thing that I want to say as well, and it's important also to stress how, when it comes to the integration, that we see more and more companies also focusing on retention of talent, even supporting, the talent financially in moving into permanent residency, obtention of citizenship, just to keep them and making sure that, they can move on.
Move forward. Yeah, indeed. I mean, we see that there are legal pathways on paper, but extremely difficult to access in reality. The mapping study that ICMPD, in cooperation with ECDPM, prepared last year shows there are 294 legal pathways for labour into the EU. And that diversity is great opportunity, but it also means for an aspiring migrant, it's extremely complicated. How and where do you fit? And this is where I think EU member states really need to look at roles of institutions like MRCs in third countries, this legal gateway office model, and eventually the talent pool to really act as a way to guide people to the right path so that they don't need to choose alternatives. You mentioned, Jo, that small business is starting to take some steps and that employers are really looking at retention. Would you have one good practice example? Let us finish on a happier note. We've heard many different challenges despite the economic imperative for our skilled migration. Would you have any good example that, be it private sector or EU member state?
I think there, we will hear about a lot of good examples later today with the skills mobility partnerships. I think these are really, really good examples. I also am really hopeful with all the other initiatives that are on the EU agenda, and especially as well, and I want to re-emphasize the EU visa strategy, because we often forget how difficult and how long it can take to just obtain a visa. It can be a duplication of the work that has already been done. Just looking at this and and make sure that we can ease the process for the talent that we need. That is, I would say, a really good practices, and not looking at diplomatic posts as this is the post of my country and there you need to submit, but maybe looking a little bit more as a pool of diplomatic posts that can, share resources, and of course the digitization hopefully will help there as well, because that is a good example that I wanted to share. But there is a lot of good examples and a lot of good initiatives on the agenda that I can look hopeful into the future.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, there are no alternative facts here. We are an aging society in Europe, and skilled labour at all levels is going to be a key element for social cohesion moving forward. And the challenge remains, how do we open up this political space so that we can improve the systems? Systems don't improve without a political context and a policy environment around them to enable that. And we do need improved systems. The waiting times for visas are unacceptable. The time that it takes in country to get residence permits, up to 18 months in some member states, makes people extremely vulnerable. We need to invest as the EU in better language engagement to open up pathways to third country nationals, recognizing especially that for some member states where English or French or other languages are not necessarily bridging languages, there may need to be additional investment. Factual discussions such as the one today is a start, but we need to be welcoming societies. We will not win any race for talent when people are concerned about how they're going to be treated when they arrive in Europe. And with all of the migration discussions right now, I think we also need to take pause and realize the message we are projecting for the skilled labour that we do need. And we need to move beyond the glossy talent attraction websites to process visas in a way that is also predictable. For now, many EU member states reflexively swipe left, even though they claim that they're open for a match with talent. So we are saying we're open for business, but we are not enabling it. I think that is the key message, and the economic imperative, I believe, is quite clear. So before I release our panelists, I would offer to those of you in the room an opportunity for 2 questions. Two hands really fast. So 1 and 2, please.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Andrew Monroe from the Irish Department of Justice, Home Affairs and Migration. Really just to echo your question to Agostino, that we welcome the work that the central bank is doing. The more data and the more understanding we can have in this area, the more we can design policies to meet those needs. We're currently developing a migration and integration strategy in Ireland, and we find data gaps all over the place in our own data, but also at European level. So anything that the ECB can contribute to that now and into the future will be extremely welcome.
Great, thank you. There we go.
Thank you so much. A question from my side, Thomas Müllers from Austria. As far as I know, there is a big development in artificial intelligence and robotics and so on. And when I listen to your discussion here and skills, labor migration, skilled labor migration, have you an answer for me what this development in artificial intelligence and robotics will have an effect on these needs of societies, Western societies, especially on skilled labor migration? And as far, perhaps I'm watching the wrong documentaries and read the wrong articles, but as far as I know, will this have some major effects on the way we work in our societies in future, and the kind of work is needed in a society? Thank you.
Maybe from a business perspective, you want to hazard a guess on the future of AI and digitalization?
I mean, you know, I'm a lawyer, I don't know. But what I can say, you know, when I look at AI, AI, for example, we see it more and more used as well by governments, you know, for data analytics, for example, enforcement, you know, towards companies. So we see more and more AI used in the migration world. On the other hand, you know, when you look at AI, it's clear that and you already alluded to it, you know, that the ICT sector is really a sector that in most of the countries is to some extent listed as a shortage occupation. I'm also, you know, very happy to see that what happened with the EU Blue Card scheme, that is the first sector where the EU member states were forced to assimilate professional experience with educational requirements if the professional experience lasts at least 3 years, so that you see that migration pathways also need to evolve and can't focus only anymore on those educational requirements. So I can say this from a legal perspective, but I don't know whether you want to say something more about the specific need of the town.
Very, very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly because we are running out of time. So on the data, indeed, unfortunately we don't produce data and we are not fully responsible for the data, but I guess with our work we put attention on what data needs to be collected and how to improve. So definitely we will keep putting pressure on exercising more data. Maybe one quick thing on AI, because it's very important. I mean, the jury on the impact of AI on the labor market is really out, and we still don't know. And just to let you just have a big framework here, like the last 2 Nobel Prize, Acemoglu working also on technology says that have limited impact on labor productivity. Agion this year has other work saying there will be huge productivity boost. The key thing, of course, in the future we will see, but on average what you will see is that when you look at the economy, AI can automatize or can make use of robots for certain tasks, but not for everything. So the complementarity of technology and labor will always be very close and very difficult to substitute. So to the extent we need labor, either domestically or via immigration, I think it would play a complementary role with technology. It would be very hard to see like some so-called corner solution where we only have technology and we can do everything with AI and robotics. So I think
so. A closing message would be that AI will not change a light bulb. AI will not support the plumbing in your house, and AI will not take care of our elderly, but the green and digital transition and the use of AI is both a need in countries of origin as well as within the EU, and I think jointly we can look at ensuring that we have the skills at the right level and when we need them. Thank you very much. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you, Agostino, and your first VMC. Thank you very much. And thank you, Yul, for being a willing participant on return. Thank you very much, and thank you to you. Please, if I can ask, please remain seated. Please, everyone, kindly remain seated. We're going to move directly now to an armchair conversation hosted by ICMPD's Director General, Michael Schwindelegger, who is joined by Mr. Zoran Dimitrovsky, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade from Macedonia, for a session entitled Western Balkans, Regional Perspectives on Migration and Partnerships. So please, thank you.